to pump ourselves up, that type of situation. And the reason we wanted to kind of amp ourselves up for that was because the next peak for the day was Kuxagraga. And I think you mentioned this in your podcast episode about your hike out there. It's an old Native American word that has sometimes been translated into dismal wilderness, I believe.
Yep.
And I will say, in all of the research I did for Kook, nobody said nice things about that walk.
Sure.
Not even one single person. I'm like, so you're kind of already in a headspace where you know that the next, it was 1.5 miles from Times Square to the summit of Kuxagraga. You know that trek is going to be awful, right?
Totally.
Everybody complains about the bog. They say it's the worst thing they've come across. And, it's a tough 1.5 miles. I don't think I've ever read one positive review about that trek.
Sure.
Which is kind of a bummer,
Also, too, a lot of people always just talk about the bog as, kind of like this is what's so bad about it. But people tend to forget that, or not necessarily forget, but you don't hear people talk about, you lose 700 feet of elevation over the first like half a mile or something to get down to the bog. So I remember that being more of a surprising element for me, is like just down and down and down and down and down. And it's like, whoa, it's 700 feet over such a short period of time. But then you get to the bog and you're like, okay, this is exactly what I've been reading about. So I'm there. But man, that to get here was a hell of a time as well.
100% agree with you. And that was kind of my thought looking back and wow, no one ever talked about that as far as I can remember. And it doesn't seem as significant. And, I emphasize the word as significant when you look at the topo map, but you're right. It's just down, down and down and down and down forever. And then you get down to the bottom where the bog is and you're like, okay, now I got to go back up that to get out of here.
Totally.
So it's tough, and you kind of mentally have to prepare your head for that. But I don't want to get ahead too much. We got to probably, I don't know, maybe 1/3 of the way down that initial decline, and we ran into a group of women. And it turns out that was the hiking group where the owner of the Eagle was. Her name is Jean, and we did the friendly hiker. Hey, how's it going? Hey, are you guys the one that talked to Don? And when we had brought up Don to Jean, the owner of the Eagle stuffed animal, her eyes lit up. She was like super excited, and we kind of told her the story of how we found it, and we were going to bring it back, and how I remembered seeing it online, and she was super excited, and very, very, very happy because that Eagle stuffed animal had been on every single one of her Catskill high peaks. And she was a 3,500 member, so she had done all 35 of the Catskill high peaks. And she was currently working her way through the Adirondack high peaks, and she was in her 40s on that. So she was almost done, almost a 46er. And that little Eagle stuffed animal had been on every single hike with her.
Man,
so
that's cool.
Yeah. So, she was really kind of bumming out because she thought she wouldn't be able to finish with the Eagle. It had sentimental value for her. And when we found it and, got it to the point where she could get it back, she was very grateful. Interesting little tidbit. Up until that point, even with, 70 plus mountains under its belt, that little Eagle didn't have a name. A lot of folks name their little,
of course,
their things. And this one didn't have one because Jean could never figure out a name that was meaningful or fitting or just appropriate. So, later on, after, the whole trip is over and I get online and post my story update, and I find Jean had posted that, kind of that piece where we found the eagle, and she was happy. She actually named the eagle J.D. Santanoni for me, Jay. D was for Don, and obviously Santanoni for the mountain, the Sandan. So, he got his name that day.
That's super cool. Dude, that's like a really nice human moment, human interaction. Like, that's cool. That's super cool. Yeah, I love that.
It was good. And it was one of those things that I always will look back on, and I'm very, very proud to have been a part of that.
Totally.
It's good. We're very happy. Another one of those situations where we probably chatted for far too long. We were having a good conversation, and spirits were high because, karma was in our favor at that point, So what we did was we said our goodbyes and continued the trek downward. And very shortly thereafter, we came across the bog. And like I mentioned, everybody complains about the bog. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I've gotten muddier walking from the Adirondack Lodge to Marcy Dam.
Sure.
It's really not that bad. It gets a bad rap, and I think a lot of it comes from, the headspace that people are in when they finally get there. There's no clear path through the bog necessarily. But there's a bunch of down trees, and, if you have your trekking poles or just grab a stick that's nearby, a long enough stick, you can easily make it across the 75-foot section of trail that is moist, I'll say, moist and muddy. There are far worse sections on far more well-maintained trails, I think. And that's my promoting Kuksakraga and trying to break the negativity of the bog.
You are the PR guy for the mountain of Kuksakraga. It needs you. It needs you. And also too, that that's definitely the type of place where it depends on the rain, for both the season and recently. Though it sounds like there was quite a bit of rain the last few days, so it looks like you had a pretty nice time in there, fortunately, despite the recent rains.
Yeah, we ended up getting pretty lucky on that, I think. Like I said earlier, like you mentioned, based off of what the folks that were staying at the Bradley Pond Lean-To had said, I expected it to be a lot worse. And maybe it does get worse. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But my experience out there was not so bad. It was a case of expectations not meeting reality in a good way. So I'll give it a thumbs up for that.
Terrific. So you're at the bog now. Now, around what time is it, do you think, into your hike?
Let's see. We made it to the bog. I think it was probably it was a little bit after 4. I remember it was a little after 4. I had to look back, when we were doing pictures. Thankfully, phones these days, when you take a picture, it kind of timestamps it.
Oh, totally.
File name.
Absolutely.
So, you can go back and figure that out. So we left Times Square at like 2:20 or 2:30 maybe, and it was already 4 o'clock. So we had not gone the full mile and a half, and it was already an hour and a half later.
Sure.
So another one of those points where we should have stopped, realized what the situation was, and kind of reevaluated. But that's not the headspace we were in at the time, unfortunately. But we ended up getting through the bog without anybody falling in, or nobody lost any shoes or boots. So life was good. Even the dogs made it no problem. They usually do. But so we ended up going and getting that final push to the top of Kuksakraga. And, we got up there and we felt pretty good about it. We kind of joked about it not being as terrible as expected. Probably another one of those tempting fate situations. Shouldn't have done that.
Big
hindsight. But we took some pictures, the obligatory thumbs down or middle finger picture that you do at the Kuksakraga summit sign, and, grabbed a quick snack and started the haul back to Times Square. At this point, I think it was 5. Yeah, I think it was probably 5
when we
finally got to the summit.
when you got to the summit. Oh, wow. So that means that was about almost 3 hours to the summit?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It was incredible. Like I said at the beginning, Mark and I have a lot of hikes under our belts together.
Mm-hmm.
At this point, it's been even more, right? But at that time, we had 25 or 30 hikes that we had gone on. A bunch of them were high peaks. This was high peaks number 14, 15, and 16 for me. And I hiked them all with Mark previously. So, these were not a new situation for me,
mm-hmm.
or for us. So, yeah, looking back at it going, why did that take so long? I don't know the exact answer. I just know that it was not an awesome situation.
Sure.
So looking at the clock going, okay, it's a little bit after 5. We need to get back. I ended up taking the dogs and kind of moving pretty quick. So whereas Mark was moving fast down Santanoni to Times Square, I actually was moving pretty fast from Cuxagraga back to Times Square. And I don't know if it was because of adrenaline or worry or whatever it was, but I ended up getting there a bit earlier than the guys, but it still took me a good amount of time. I think I got up there at 8. Yeah, I think I reached Times Square at 8. So it took me another 2.5, 3 hours to get there.
So that's like a 6-hour round trip for Cuxagraga.
3 miles. For 3 miles.
Yeah. So yeah, if you're listening, let's just say that was a long time to hit those mountains. But at the same time, Cuxagraga is no joke. So when you're going to go there, you definitely need to plan that it will take longer than you anticipate. I know when I did it, it was just over 3 hours round trip from Times Square. So it takes some time, but 6 hours, yeah. So you're definitely pushing into the night at this point. The story is building now. This is like a Hollywood story that you're living in this moment. That's building and building and building, and the tension. It's like it's getting later now. Here we go. So continue. So you're back at Times Square now.
Yep, back at Times Square. I'm sitting there, and I'm usually a really chill, relaxed kind of guy. Come what may, I'll deal with it. It's not a big deal. When I was sitting there waiting for Dave and Mark to reach me, I was getting a little anxious, I would say. And the reason I was getting a little anxious is before every trip, I talked to my wife, and we have a plan, an emergency plan, I'll call it. And the plan typically goes like this. Hey, going on a hike. These are the guys I'm going to be with. This is how long it's going to be. This is where we're going to park. This is when I anticipate being back. If I'm not back, and this is for day trips, if I'm not back by 8 o'clock in the morning the following day, something may have gone wrong. You should start calling the Rangers and try and figure out what's up. So it is about 8:30 at night. I'm at Times Square. Mark and Dave are there. Dave pulls out his phone, and thankfully, the powers that be shined upon us for a moment, and he had some signal out there. Now, the carrier I have for my cell phone, I don't care where I am in the high peaks. I don't get service anywhere. Dave,
who do you use?
I don't know.
Who do you have?
What's that?
Who do you have?
I have Sprint.
Okay, I have Verizon, and I'm actually quite surprised, and usually it's pretty decent, surprisingly, with Verizon in the high peaks I've found, which is very helpful. But actually, before we move on, I want to go back to what you're having an emergency plan in set with your wife. I think that's a terrific idea. I do the same thing, and I actually recently bought a GPS. Finally, eventually I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this. It's expensive, but you can always send a text message. You have the SOS. You can send program texts in there that say, I'm at the summit, all's good, or stopping for lunch. It's just like when you don't have cell phone service, and it's not even so much for you as much as it's for your loved ones at home. To make sure you're good. So I've found the GPS to be worthwhile for these emergency plans. But yes, that's terrific. And everyone listening, always let the people know who love you, where you're going, when you're going, and some sort of plan. So if something goes wrong,